There's something really special about European fun fairs. The big crowds, the bright lights, the many beer tents, the sizzle of bratwurst, and the endless repeats of the atmosphere is incredible, and if you've never been to one, you're really missing out. Along with a whole heap of crazy flat rides that spin you around in every direction imaginable, they are home to some amazing travelling roller coasters. The fact that these rides can be built up and taken apart and moved from city to city is a wonder in itself, and whilst there are a whole load of dragon wagons, wacky worms and wild mice that visit these fun fairs, there are some truly unique and special coasters that any enthusiast would love to ride. Tracking down these coasters can be quite tricky, as without a fixed location at a theme park, it's difficult to know where to go to find them. That's why in this video I'm highlighting some of the best travelling coasters, and crucially, the places where you're going to find them. Stick around till the end of the video, as I'll be highlighting a very unusual coaster that may be easier to ride than you think. There's going to be a lot of foreign fun fairs and place names in this video, so I apologise in advance for butchering their pronunciation, but I'll try my best. First up, we're going to start with a rather legendary roller coaster, the largest travelling roller coaster in the world, Olympia Looping. This coaster could be considered the pinnacle of what a travelling coaster can be, as it's got some really impressive statistics. When it visits Austria, it becomes the longest and fastest roller coaster in that country, and its stats put many static coasters to shame. The structure weighs 900 tons, and it requires 50 trailers to transport it. When it arrives at its destination, it takes just 7 days for a team of only 10 people to rebuild it. That's crazy when you think how many months it takes to build a normal roller coaster, and how many people are involved. The track length is 4,101 feet, which is astonishing for a portable coaster. That's longer than Steel Eel, Expedition G-Force, Kumba and Montu, and it's nearly 1,000 feet longer than Talon at Dorney Park. Olympia Looping is held in high regard by roller coaster enthusiasts, and rightly so. This coaster was designed by two legends of the business, Anton Schwarzkopf and Werner Stengel, and it's a ride that really packs a punch. It features no less than 5 vertical loops, and those multicoloured loops are where it gets its name from, matching the colours of the Olympic rings, although when it visits the UK it has to change its name to Munich Looping. Whatever you call it though, it's an impressive coaster, and it's well known for the strong positive G you get in the loops, particularly if it's running the full-length 7-car trains. This is enough to pull over 5G, and the coaster has been doing that since 1989, over 35 years ago. Even watching this coaster is a bit of a marvel, as it can run up to 5 trains on the track all at the same time, and watching those trains race past each other on the twisted track is quite mesmerising. That also gives this coaster a ridiculous throughput that I've seen estimated at 2,800 riders per hour, so you're never going to have to wait long to ride. One crazy thing I discovered whilst researching this video is that there was once a concept by the owner Rudolf Barth to make Olympia Looping even larger by adding a second lift hill, an Immelmann, a Cobra roll and a zero-G roll. Imagine what it would be like to ride that monster and how many trucks it would take to transport it around. If you want to ride this coaster, then it's not actually that difficult to find these days. Olympia Looping used to travel around the German funfair circuit quite a lot, but in recent years it's taken up a much more predictable routine. At the start of the season, it opens at Wiener Prater in Austria, where it stays until autumn, at which point it moves to Munich for Oktoberfest, before crossing the Channel to London for Hyde Park Winter Wonderland. After that, it returns to Prater and the cycle starts again. If you have the choice which of these locations to visit it at, then my advice is to try and ride it at Oktoberfest, as it feels like the proper home for this German coaster, and riding it after a few large beers makes it all the more fun. Next up, we have what many consider the sister coaster of Olympia Looping, Alpina Bahn. This is another large Schwarzkopf coaster, and it debuted back in 1983, which makes it older than I am, although Alpina Bahn has aged much more gracefully. Unlike Olympia Looping, this ride features no inversions and instead has a large airtime hill after the drop, something that you just don't tend to see on travelling coasters. This hill provides a nice floating sensation as you sail over it, before the ride continues in a series of high-speed twists and turns in a repeating figure of 8 pattern. This coaster is an absolute blast to ride, and it always gives a great speed sensation. It received new trains a couple of years ago, but thankfully they kept a classic style, so all that's holding you in is a simple lap bar, which makes it much more comfortable than some of the rides in this list. A quirky fact about this coaster is that it's been immortalised as a piece of scenery for train sets, which you can still buy today, albeit at a rather expensive price. This is an honour I don't think any other coaster apart from a Wilde Maus has had, and if you're curious, you can see both of these at the fantastic miniature Wonderland in Hamburg. If you want to ride Alpina Bahn, tracking it down can be a little tricky, as it's often on the move and its route isn't that easy to predict. Last year I found it at Stuttgart Frühlingsfest in spring, which runs from late April to May, but the most likely place to find it is at Munich Oktoberfest or Rhein-Kirmes in July, where more often than not it will be an attraction. Outside of those times, it tends to visit some of the other major German fun fairs, commonly being an attraction at Kirmes in August, although this year, according to Coaster Count, from March to April it's scheduled to be at Hamburg Frühlingsdom, for the first time since 2011. It'll also be at Schwarzkopf, the biggest fun fair in Luxembourg, from late August to early September, which makes it less likely to be at Munich Oktoberfest this year. Next up we have a French giant in the form of King. King is an impressively large coaster if nothing else, and if you squint a bit, you could easily confuse it for one of the classic travelling Schwarzkopf designs, as it's a similar height and size. Unfortunately, this is where the similarities end, as this coaster has a rather poor reputation amongst enthusiasts. It was built by French manufacturer Soke and has a similar layout to Alpina Bahn, but it's considered to be much rougher, and that's only made worse by the bulky over-the-shoulder headbanging restraints that the ride has. Contrary to the general opinion, however, when I rode it I didn't think it was that bad of an experience, and you can't deny the sheer size of the thing is impressive, and I'll probably ride it again if our paths ever crossed. It stands at 85 feet tall, which may not sound that huge in the grand scheme of things, but it's about twice the height of your typical Wilde Maus coaster, so when set up next to one of those rides, it becomes a standout attraction. That is, unless there's a pirate ship with a standing cage next to it. King has also been on the French funfair circuit since 1995, and as such is nearly 30 years old. However, over that time it seems to have been repainted in just about every single colour of the rainbow. When I last rode it, the track was blue, but more recent videos show it being red with white supports. If you want to ride it, then it follows a fairly regular schedule, appearing at Foire du Trône in Paris in spring, and then at Foire de la Saint-Romain in Rouen in autumn. Next up we have one of my real favourites, Wilde Maus XXL. Now this ride is a whole lot more than your typical Wilde Maus coaster, hence the XXL name. If you look closely however, you might notice that the inner skeleton of this coaster, which has yellow supports, is actually a standard matte compact Wilde Maus coaster, similar to Vertigo in Madrid or Wilde Maus at Hershey Park. Around this skeleton however is an extended track with green supports, which has a larger lift hill that makes it nearly twice the size of a standard Wilde Maus. This allows for 2 extra large drops and results in you being sent into the rest of the layout at a higher speed than normal. The ride you get from this is certainly wild, as the trim brakes never seem to do all that much, so you hit every corner at high speed and are flung left or right in the cart, usually with everyone on board laughing. There's more to this ride however, as in addition to the coaster, there's also a mini funhouse that you have to navigate before you board, featuring water hazards, twisting metal plates, and crafty moving walkways that are designed to trip you up. It's like you get 2 funfair rides for the price of one. It all comes together to make an incredibly fun experience, and this coaster is sure to be one that I'll ride every time I see it. Now, if you want to ride Wilde Maus XXL, I'll try and help you track it down. It tends to get around a lot and typically visits 6 or 7 different locations each year, and I'm sure I've ridden it in at least 4 different cities. One of the most likely places to find it is in Hamburg at one of their Dom events, which run 3 times a year in spring, summer and winter, although which one of these events it shows up at can change year on year, although spring is usually your best bet, and it should be there around the time I release this video. It's also quite common to find this coaster at Winter Wonderland in London, although it occasionally misses a year. You can also usually find it at one or two of the larger fun fairs in Germany, such as Rheinkirmes, Bremer Freimarkt or Krangerkirmes, but the frequency at these locations tends to vary quite a bit. This year, according to Coaster Count, it should also be at Wurstmark Sausage Fest in Bad Dürkheim in September. Next, we have another classic Schwarzkopf design, Jetstar. There are a few permanent installations of this style of coaster still in existence, such as Tiger at Indiana Beach or Jetstar 2 at Lagoon. However, the ride was originally designed to be portable, and a few have toured European funfair circuits over the years. There's at least one still travelling though, and it was great to find this coaster in Paris after I visited Parc Asterix. Strangely, this one seems to have an Olympic theme, just like Olympia Looping, but it doesn't seem to incorporate that into its name, which is just the standard Jetstar. The ride is characterised by fast, swooping drops, and riding it gives a great speed rush. It's also surprisingly smooth considering the age of this ride. You tend to find this coaster in the vicinity of Paris, either at Foire du Trône in April to early July, or Fête de l'Auger at the end of July to late August. It also occasionally appears at Foire aux Ménages in Lille, which takes place twice a year in spring and summer. Next is a coaster you'll almost certainly have heard of before, Rock and Roller Coaster. Except this one isn't featuring Aerosmith, nor is it being rethemed to the Avengers or the Muppets. Instead, this is another classic Schwarzkopf coaster that predates Disney's Rock and Roller Coasters by some 30 years, although it hasn't always used that name. Originally called Super 8 Bahn, before being renamed to the Wilde 50s, this coaster debuted way back in the year 1969. The same year that man first walked on the moon, Concorde took its first flight, and the laser printer was invented. It's truly amazing that this coaster is still travelling around Europe, and just goes to show how well it's been taken care of. After all, it's been thrilling riders for over 55 years. It's kind of surprising that Disney haven't come after their trademark for this ride, and the showman that runs this coaster seems to be somewhat tempting fate with their choice of font on their website for their logo. I guess there's plenty of examples of Disney not being that overly protective of its IP on the funfair circuit though. The ride design is known as the Wildcat, and originally it came in 3 different sizes, with this coaster being the largest style. Its design has been imitated by other manufacturers, but somehow the Schwarzkopf coasters maintain a smooth ride unlike any of their competition. If you want to take this coaster for a ride, it doesn't follow that predictable a path. The most likely place to see it is probably at one of the Hamburg Dom events, as it usually shows up at least once or twice a year, either in spring, summer or winter. When this video is published, it should also be at Berlin Frühlingsfest, where it will remain until the first week of April. Next up, we have quite a similar ride, Alpen Coaster. Alpen Coaster is another Schwarzkopf Wildcat that's a little smaller than Rock and Roller, but it's got a similar layout. The ride is great fun, and thanks to an extensive refurbishment in 2017, it seems to be running better than ever. Although when I did ride, one of the ops had to ride with me so the train was heavy enough to complete the circuit. Amazingly, this coaster is even older than Rock and Roller, having been built back in 1967. But with modern LED lighting and its fresh paint scheme, you could easily think it's just rolled off the production line. It's also one of the hardest working coasters on the circuit, and typically visits 8 or 9 different events each year, although that's much easier for this ride as it only takes 9 trailers to transport it. I last rode this coaster at a smaller event called Maimas in Mannheim, not far from Expedition G-Force's home holiday park. But similar to its sister Rock and Roller Coaster, this one's movements are quite difficult to predict. This year it should be at Frühlingsfest in Stuttgart from late April to May. It should also be at Krangerkirmes in August, and a smaller festival called Dult in Regensburg in September. Other than that, it typically sticks to smaller festivals, although it's often irregular at Hamburg Winterdom, so keep an eye out if there's a local festival in your area while you're travelling, as this coaster may well pop up there. Next, we have a very unique coaster, Höllenblitz. Höllenblitz claims to be the largest transportable indoor roller coaster in the world, and it really is one of a kind. This coaster has a traditional train, but each car on it can spin around freely, adding to the thrill of the ride. The highlight of this coaster is the indoor section, which is filled with smoke, lighting effects and lasers. It really bombards the senses. It's an awesome experience as the train dives through this area and you spin around, so every ride can be different from the last. The impressive outer facade is inspired by Indiana Jones movies and features a 30-foot tall waterfall, but interestingly it didn't always look like this. Höllenblitz has had two major rethemes after it first debuted in 1992 as Magic Mountain and had a giant King Kong-style gorilla at the front. The first retheme in 1998 changed it to Star World, this time inspired by Star Wars, before it changed to its current Höllenblitz theme in 2007. Usually this ride is a staple of Oktoberfest in Munich, but somehow it managed to miss it last year. It's also commonly seen at Rheinkirmes and Kragerkirmes, and is not unknown for it to pop up at one of the Dom festivals in Hamburg. The ride has a great website which I suggest you check out, however when I emailed to ask them where it would likely be the rest of this year, all I got in reply were 2 emails with the same video attached. Oh well. If you've watched this video till now, you're obviously a true roller coaster fan, so as a special treat I'm going to highlight another travelling roller coaster that is far from being the tallest or fastest, and instead is one of the most ridiculous, but I'm sure you'll still want to ride it anyway. The amazing Chance Toboggan. Now I admit, this ride is a bit silly, but it'll always hold a special place for me, as somehow a video I published of one got over 30 million views, and I've no idea why. It's the reason my secondary shorts channel has over 30 times the subscriber count of my main channel, but regardless, I still find it an interesting and wacky ride. There's really no other coaster quite like it, and it must have been one of the first coasters ever to have a vertical lift hill. Eat your heart out, Gerstlauer. This is another ride that's getting on in years, with most of them being constructed in the early 70s, but despite that it's actually easier to track one of these down than you might think, as there's still at least 3 of them touring Europe. One of these is in the UK, operated by John Vesseldine, and tends to visit small funfairs in the south of England. There's also 2 of these touring around France. One is called Toboggan sur Rail, and I think it may have been refurbished and brought back from the dead in recent years, as the other one, simply called Toboggan, proudly displays a sign that it's unique in Europe. A bit of a lie now. These 2 can be spotted around the smaller funfairs in France, so if you find yourself near one, go and give it a go, unless you're taller than my height of 6'2", in which case you're better off just watching to avoid risking injury. There are of course many other travelling coasters out there, but I think these ones I've highlighted are generally the most interesting ones, and if you've been paying attention you'll probably have noticed some similarities between them all, namely that they're all pretty old, and most were designed by Anton Schwarzkopf, a legendary roller coaster engineer who sadly died in 2001. It's got me wondering if perhaps the days of the travelling coaster have passed, which would be a real shame as seeing these rides at fun fairs and carnivals is a wonderful experience, but no roller coaster can continue to operate forever. I do think it's kind of strange that we haven't seen any new large coasters in the funfair circuit for a very long time. Transporting these coasters has obviously become more expensive. After all, having a convoy transport Olympia Looping in 50 containers can't be cheap. I once saw a rumour though that when it first came to Hyde Park Winter Wonderland, it made over 10 million euros, but it's hard to corroborate that. Hard evidence of just how much it makes is quite difficult to find, but even with a very conservative estimate of an hourly capacity of 2,000 people, when each of them is paying 10 to 12 euros to ride, it could easily make 100,000 euros in under 5 hours, and Winter Wonderland runs 12 hours a day over 45 days. So why aren't we seeing any new travelling coasters to make more money? Interestingly, during a European Coaster Club video interview with Alan Schilke, the renowned designer of RMC coasters, I was able to ask the question whether the Raptor track, with its need for fewer supports, could become a portable coaster, and he seemed very open to the idea. The main limiting factor would have been the number of trucks needed to transport the ride, but no showman have ever asked for one to be built. There is some hope, however, though, for a rejuvenation of travelling coasters, as it's been announced that a new large inverting travelling coaster should be appearing in Germany next year, to be operated by Vorlop, the owners of Rock and Roller Coaster and Alpen Coaster. He is hoping it'll be a big success and may lead to even more new coasters in the coming years. Let me know which of these coasters is your favourite and which one you'd most like to ride. Or if I've missed any other travelling coasters you think should be in this video, drop them in the comments. I hope you all have fun tracking down and riding these awesome rides though. I've been Rollercoaster David, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again in another video very soon.